The Mini LMT just got here and it's blown apart already. Welcome back to the channel, guys. If you saw my first initial overview video of the Losi Mini LMT where I tested this thing out, ran it through its paces, and really fell in love with it, you'll know why I began taking it apart already. The two main things I said that I thought needed to be fixed, at least for my driving style, was some heavier weight fluid in the diff and some lighter weight shock oil to help that suspension work a little smoother. First things first, I will tell you, if you plan on digging into the diffs on this little truck, make sure to get you a drill, an electronic driver, something, because there's a bunch of screws to take out. I'm sure it lends to the toughness of these little trucks and how it looks that these axles are stronger than even the larger scale LMT axles. But there's a ton of screws to take out just to get to these diffs. But before you go ahead and tear into your Mini LMT, I haven't actually seen many people open up the diffs on these little trucks online, which is why I was going ahead and trying to put thicker fluid in the diff. But that doesn't seem to be possible. It's actually still pretty cool that they were able to fit a diff in a truck this small, and a pretty beefy looking one at that, but this isn't a sealed diff at all. You can see I can pull this side of the outdrive straight off, and we have what looks like 3 spider gears in there and our 2 outdrive gears, and there's just a pin holding them together here. There isn't any way to seal this diff where we can put in any thicker fluid. So unfortunately, unless some aftermarket manufacturer makes a sealed diff for this little truck, we won't really be putting any thicker fluid in it. I will be trying something just to test it out. If you've been around the channel for a long time, you might remember these old silicone earplugs that I used to semi-lock the diff on my SMT10. Being that this isn't fluid, it won't leak out. So I'm gonna attempt to put some very small pieces of this inside of here to hopefully stiffen up the diff action a little bit. I have no clue if this is gonna work. I am not recommending anyone go do this yet. I'm gonna test it out for myself and see how it works. Over the next couple of running videos and bashing videos with this truck, we can see how it works out, and then we can kind of give a final impressions of it, see if it's actually worth doing, or who knows, maybe an aftermarket manufacturer will have something out by then. So I got a good bit packed in and around there. Now it's time to put all 8,000 screws back in this axle to get it back on the truck. I'm gonna do the other one off camera because you don't need to see all of those screws coming out. And then we can move on to those shocks. With the axles back assembled and back on the truck, we can now move on to changing out that shock fluid like I mentioned. I ran into something a little interesting here messing with the first shock. Maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't believe this shock unscrews like a typical RC shock. Holding on to the body here and trying to twist the cap off, it doesn't come off, and looking at it closely, there doesn't appear to be any seam. The only thing that I have seen is this hex on the bottom here. Basically, this bottom seal would come off. And sure enough, it does. I already drained the shock fluid out of this one, but that means we have to put the new shock fluid from the bottom of this shock, and I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to bleed this shock. I guess I'm just gonna leave them sit for a while, let the air bubbles rise up, and we'll also have to kind of pay attention to how much shock oil we put in here. We definitely don't want to overfill it, but this is the first time I've ever seen oil-filled RC shocks that don't unscrew from the top. The cap doesn't come off. Let me know down in the comments below if this is something you've seen before. I'm not quite sure why this would have been designed this way. This is actually a little embarrassing, but my plan was to put some 10 weight oil in these shocks. I don't have any, so we're gonna go with 30 weight, which is the lightest that I have. I think it's a little lighter than what was in this shock. If not, it might be the same thing. Needless to say, this is going to be a bit of an adventure filling up these shocks anyway, so let's see how this goes. So out of curiosity, while I let the shock oil set in those shock bodies, I decided to pull out the manual and see if it mentioned anything about these shocks. Funny enough, in the shock cleaning section here, it tells you to remove the bottom cartridge from the shock body and dispose of the fluid, and go ahead and clean the shock and reassemble the shock using some 17.5 weight fluid, which is what they recommend. But then it says slowly move the shaft and piston up and down to remove air bubbles. I don't think you can do that without having the cap come off the top side of the shock. And sure enough, if we come all the way to the back of our manual here, the very last page on the exploded view, we can see this shock body is one piece. This cap stays in one piece and the shock disassembles from the bottom half. Like I said, a little weird. I'm not used to seeing that. I've never seen that on an RC shock before. Recommended 17.5 weight oil, so the 30 weight that I just put in there is going to be heavier, which is opposite of what I wanted to do. So we're going to do a little bit of a quick fix for that. I'm actually going to take the holes in the shock piston and drill 2 more holes roughly the same size at 90 degrees from these original holes. That should give us some better flow even with that 30 weight fluid. And hey, if it doesn't work out, I'm kind of eyeing these aluminum shocks anyway. So you may be able to see what I was able to do here, filling up the shocks from the bottom and going ahead and putting that whole cartridge assembly back in from the bottom, working the shock shaft up and down just a bit to make sure I don't have any trapped air underneath that piston, and slowly assembling back together, letting any shock oil that wants to come out past the threads, let it come out and wiping away. And I think we got a pretty decent shock build here. Like I said, I'm pretty interested in those aluminum bodied shocks sometime in the near future, getting them back on the truck. And I do believe it is a little softer than it was before. Maybe those extra holes did help us out a little bit. We'll have to test this thing out really soon to figure that out. Like I said, if not, I'll be curious about those aluminum bodied shocks and some even lighter weight fluid. Make sure to stay tuned and subscribe. We'll have a running video coming soon where we'll test out what we did with the diff and these shocks. Some pretty interesting finds here today in this little mini LMT. Was not expecting the diffs to be built like they are, or these shocks to be built like they are. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the design choices Losi went with this little truck. The true test will be coming soon. As always, thanks again for watching. Peace.